Have you ever heard of a man so evil that God removed him without warning, without a second chance, just making him disappear from the earth by divine command? The Bible mentions his fate in one simple line, but there's more to his story than what's written in that brief phrase, a story that played a major role in shaping the family line of Jesus Christ. Today, we'll look into the surprising story of the man who was killed by God. We're going to explore one of the darkest and most powerful stories in the Bible. Share this video with anyone who wants to understand how even our mistakes can be used by God for His glory. Together, let's discover who was and how his short story teaches us about God's character. To understand why your story matters, we first need to know the historical and spiritual background in which he was born. This was during the time of the patriarchs, roughly between the 19th and 15th centuries before Christ, a time when the people of Israel were just beginning to form long before the arrival of kings, prophets, or Moses' law. Was the son of Judah, a name that might sound familiar to you. Judah was the fourth son of Jacob, also known as Israel, from his wife Leah. It was from Judah that King David would eventually come, and according to Christian tradition, Jesus Christ himself. Let's trace the family line. Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, Jacob had Judah, and Judah had his firstborn and the heir to all promises. The future of the Messiah's lineage was in this young man's hands. He was given the responsibility of carrying on God's covenant with an entire nation. He had great privilege, but, as we will see, having privilege does not guarantee good character. What happened to would change not only his own family, but also the future of an entire nation. Before we talk about we need to understand a key choice made by his father Judah. The Bible tells us that Judah separated from his brothers and traveled to the region of Adullam, far from the land of their ancestors. There, he became friends with a man named Ira, an Adullamite, and made a decision that went against the tradition of his family. He married the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. This detail is important, yet often overlooked by many readers. The Canaanites did not share the same faith as the descendants of Abraham. Their customs, beliefs, and religious practices were very different. Abraham had warned his son Isaac not to marry Canaanite women, and Isaac and Rebekah had suffered when their son Esau married Hittite women. Now, Judah, the keeper of God's promise, was mixing his blood with the people of the land. It was in this environment of spiritual compromise that Judah's firstborn was born, a child caught between two worlds, the heir to Abraham's promises, but raised with Canaanite influences. Judah's choices began a chain of events that would eventually lead to trouble for his firstborn. Genesis 38:3 simply says, "And she, the daughter of Shua, conceived and bore a son and called his name As the firstborn, held a significant position in ancient cultures. He wasn't just the main heir to his father's possessions, but he was also meant to lead the family after Judah's death. As the firstborn, he received special blessings and a double portion of the inheritance. Most importantly, he was meant to continue the spiritual legacy. Through him, the promises made to Abraham were supposed to pass on. In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Imagine the weight of responsibility on this young man's shoulders. He wasn't just any descendant of Judah. He was the key to fulfilling God's promises. The Bible doesn't tell us much about his early years, what kind of education he had, or the values he learned, but we can guess that he grew up in a home torn between Hebrew traditions and Canaanite ways. His name, meaning watchful in Hebrew, seems ironic, considering how his actions would later reveal deep spiritual blindness. When grew up, His father Judah arranged for him to marry a woman named Tamar. The name Tamar means palm tree in Hebrew, which symbolizes strength and uprightness. The Bible doesn't tell us whether Tamar was a Canaanite or a descendant of Abraham. The text doesn't clarify this, but one thing is clear. Tamar understood God's plan for that family far better than the men of Judah's household. The marriage between and Tamar wasn't just a typical family union. It was meant to be a sacred covenant that would bring descendants to carry on the promised lineage. But a tragedy occurred. Genesis 38:7 simply tells us that Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the eyes of the Lord, and as a result, God took his life. That one sentence sums up Er's life. No further explanation, no details about his sin, just a statement. He was wicked in the eyes of the Lord, and God removed him from the earth. This brief mention hides a deep sense of divine judgment. What did do to deserve such a fate? The first person in the Bible to be killed directly by God. The Bible doesn't tell us, and this silence speaks volumes. We know that God doesn't eliminate people for small offenses. God is compassionate, merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in love, as described in Exodus 34:6. This suggests that Er's wickedness must have been extreme. Jewish tradition in the Midrash offers a few interpretations. One is that committed the same sin as his brother Onan later would, wasting his seed to prevent Tamar from having children. Why? Perhaps to keep Tamar's beauty intact, avoiding pregnancy, or simply out of selfishness, not wanting to share his inheritance with children. Some scholars suggest that introduced Canaanite idolatry into his home, corrupting the faith of his family and drifting away from the path of the patriarchs. Other commentators think that might have been abusive towards Tamar. The truth is, we don't know for sure, and perhaps there's a lesson in the silence of the scriptures. The focus isn't on the specific sin, but on God's response to it. God sees what is hidden from human eyes, our actions, and the intentions of our hearts. What's clear is that, despite the great privilege of being the firstborn in the Messianic line, failed in his responsibility, and God's judgment was swift and final. Er's death left a gap in the family line that needed an extraordinary solution, and that solution would come from the most unexpected source. After Er's sudden death, we come across an ancient and important custom to understand the next part of this story, the Law of Leverate Marriage. Though this law was officially codified by Moses in Deuteronomy 25, it was already practiced during the time of the patriarchs. When a man died without leaving children, it was the responsibility of his brother to marry the widow and have children on behalf of the deceased. The first child born from this marriage would be considered the son of the dead brother, ensuring his name and lineage lived on. This custom was meant to prevent any family from disappearing in Israel. After Er's death, Judah turned to his second son, Onan, and told him, "Go to your brother's wife, marry her, and raise up children for your brother." Onan partially obeyed. He married Tamar, but each time they were together, he spilled his seed on the ground, refusing to give his brother an heir. The Bible is clear about this. Onan knew that any child born from Tamar would not be his, and his actions were purely selfish. Onan understood that if he fathered a child with Tamar, that child would be considered heirs and would inherit the majority of Judah's estate. With her dead and childless, Onan was now the de facto firstborn. Having a child that would legally belong to her threatened Onan's privileged position. Once again, we see divine judgment in action. What Onan did was evil in God's eyes, and God took his life as well. 2 sons of Judah died, both for the same reason. selfishness, and defiance of God's purpose. Judah's family now faced a crisis. The divine plan seemed at risk due to a pattern of disobedience and judgment. What would happen to the promised lineage after the deaths of two sons in such a similar way? Centuries later, when the people of Israel were in the wilderness after the Exodus, Numbers 26 records the census of the tribes. Er's family is mentioned as part of the tribe of Judah, but there are no direct descendants. His place was taken by the sons of Perez, who became large clans. The lineage continued, not through the rightful firstborn, but through Perez, who was born from the union of Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar, a relationship that, under normal circumstances, would have been considered scandalous. Perhaps the greatest lesson from Er's story is this: none of us is irreplaceable in God's plan, but we are all invited to be part of it. The story doesn't end with Perez. The book of Ruth continues this lineage. Perez has Hezron, and so on, until we reach Boaz, who marries Ruth the Moabitess. From them comes Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of David, the king after God's own heart. To David, God promises, "I will establish your throne forever." When we turn to the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew starts with these words: "The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham." Among the many men listed, something remarkable stands out. Tamar is one of the few women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. Why? Because her courage and determination saved the Messianic line when the men failed. The story that began with Er's wickedness eventually leads, centuries later, to the birth of the Savior. Where sin increased, grace overflowed. From death came life. From injustice came justice. From failure came redemption. This divine pattern is evident not just in Er's story, but throughout the Bible, culminating at the cross of Christ. What can we learn from this ancient story, which seems so far removed from our world today? First, that privilege does not guarantee faithfulness. Er had everything to be a key figure in salvation history, but his wickedness disqualified him. Second, that God does not tolerate injustice. Third, that when people fail, God often uses the unexpected. Tamar, a widow with no power in a patriarchal society, becomes the tool God uses to preserve the Messianic line. Fourth, that God's plan cannot be stopped. Neither Er's death, nor Onan's disobedience, nor Judah's fear could prevent God's promise from being fulfilled in ways no one expected. Finally, that God uses imperfect people, situations, and choices to fulfill His perfect will. The genealogy of Jesus includes not only heroes of faith, but also ordinary people with flaws, fears, and mistakes just like us. Your life, like Er's, is part of a bigger picture. The question is, will you be remembered for the gap you left or the legacy you built? Er's story reminds us that we are all part of a larger story. Each of us has a role to play in God's plan. We can choose to waste our privileges like Er or fight for justice like Tamar, even when the odds are against us. The name means watchful, but ironically, he didn't guard his own character. His life challenges us to watch our attitudes, choices, and hearts. Even when we fail, God remains faithful, and His redemptive purpose continues, sometimes through paths we least expect. Were you familiar with their story? Leave a comment sharing what stood out to you most in this biblical account. If this video has blessed you, please like, share with friends, and subscribe to the channel for more content revealing the often overlooked yet powerful stories of God's Word.